thank you for coming, is that we want to talk about incident action planning and coordinated response for rural police departments. My name is Scott Lowry. I'm the president and co-founder of StrataSite. StrataSite is a Toledo, Ohio-based company that that recognize that we need to, from a community standpoint, start thinking about how we're going to respond to large scale emergency critical incidents at our critical infrastructure, basically our schools. Is that every community recognizes that we need to ensure that we're doing everything that we can to keep our schools safe. This webinar is not intended to be a sales pitch for StrataSite. This is intended to educate on what a coordinated response plan should look like based on best practices, and really taking into consideration that rural communities, those small communities where we don't have all of those resources at hand, and recognizing that our partners, our secondary law enforcement, our mutual aid fire departments are going to have to come so that we can adequately respond to these incidents. Uh, my background is that I retired from law enforcement after 25 years at the Findlay, Ohio Police Department. During my law enforcement career, was very fortunate to be involved in a lot of different parts of the law enforcement activities. Is that Along with that, is that I'm the lead trainer for two Department of Homeland Security courses, crisis management for schools. And that allows me to travel across the country and work with different communities, rural communities specifically, in regards to all things school safety. And so I think that that's an additional benefit that StrataSite brings to the table, is that not only my law enforcement career and understanding that whatever it is that we do, whatever plan that we come up with, it has to work in the real world. We have to be able to, whatever that policy procedure is that we have to be able to implement that. And I think that we have accomplished that with StrataSite. And and then with my ability to connect with communities across the country, is that we find out what other communities are doing, is that in regards to school safety, in regards to that 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 collaboration with emergency services. And I come back and we start to develop features and tools that are based on those things that I find that other people are doing that works. And that really that's the threshold that we have. Will it work in the real world? Is that all of us from the law enforcement community understand that there are processes and philosophies specifically to school safety that we look at and we think that that's not going to work in the real world. And so that's kind of what our mission is to just elevate the capabilities of our communities, and so that we don't make the same mistakes that were made in previous events in this country, quite honestly. And a vast majority of those mistakes wasn't due to negligence or incompetence. It was just the fact that there was not a well thought out plan. And if we have a well thought out plan, is that we're going to minimize that chaos. And that's truly what this is about, is minimizing that chaos. Uh, Quite honestly, there is no software platform out there as dynamic as what StrataSite is, and the tools and features that it provides. Is that we have the ability to build a plan and then share that plan with people that need to know the plan when the emergency happens. We are most recently a proud sponsor of the Ohio Small Police Departments Association. I will tell you is that as a law enforcement officer in Findlay, Ohio, and rising through the ranks and command level, is that I didn't even know this organization existed. Is that but as I have created that relationship with the organization, is that I it's phenomenal. Quite honestly, is that we can come together and really as heads of law enforcement agencies, small agencies, is have conversations about all of those nuances, those hurdles that we have, and being able to overcome them. So we truly are a proud sponsor of them. The way this webinar is going to work today is that I'm going to run through the curriculum, and then at the end then we're going to have a conversation about any questions that you may have. On your toolbar, your Zoom toolbar, you have the ability to ask questions. And so, is it as we're going along, you plug a question in there, and at the end, I'm going to pull those up, and we're going to have some conversations about those questions that you do have. So feel free at any time to post your questions. Is that when we look at critical incidents in schools, and honestly, is that all things school safety, is that we tend to gravitate towards that active shooter event, and that's what we want to talk about today. Is that the nuances of that type of event, the chaos that that type of event would create for our community, and making sure that if we've identified those hurdles and we come up with a plan to overcome those hurdles is really what it's about. Those active shooter protocols that we have within our schools. Honestly, it doesn't matter which one it is, whether it's Craig's out of the alert philosophy, Alice, run, hide, fight, standard response protocol. All of them are very similar in nature. Is that my point to this is that the schools have embedded this philosophy into their emergency operation plans. I think that as a law enforcement agency, we have a responsibility to evaluate what it is that they're doing, ensure that it is meeting best practices. That is that we're not asking civilians to do things that would be detrimental to their safety during an active shooter event. And so I my wish to you is if you're not, is that really have conversations with your school officials in regards to that. I think that there is a need for the 911 centers within our communities to be trained on what it is that those protocols are, what language, what terminology are they using. If school is advocating for the barricading of the classroom doors, uh, our 911 center being trained on that, and being able to provide guidance to staff that dials 911 and doesn't remember what they're supposed to do, or quite honestly, is the students dialing 911. I recently listened to a YouTube video in regards to the events that unfolded in Uvalde, and in one particular classroom there was a student whose teacher was injured, and they dialed 911. And so, is it making sure that that 911 center is prepared for that? Um, Fire and EMS plays an integral part in our coordinated response, and I'm going to get into that. But it's really just making sure that we're all on the same sheet of music. That philosophy that is inside the building is that what we're going to do is marry up with what they're doing. Our outside actions are going to marry up with what their philosophy and protocols call for. When we look at school safety, is that uh, floor plans. Every school building in Ohio is required to have a floor plan and a site plan of that school building, and sharing it with emergency services. Critical incident mapping is a term that is moving across America in regards to school safety, and it's really just the mapping of the buildings. That is an integral part in our, from an emergency services standpoint, responding. Looking at technology, is that we're enhancing that technology that is within our schools, and that's a good thing, especially when we're talking about emergency notification systems, camera systems that are IP based, and we have access to them outside the building. That can absolutely benefit what it is that we're doing. Target hardening is really just ensuring that their visitor management system is solid. From making sure that all the doors are shut and locked throughout the school day, one point of entry, those types of things. And then finally is that fourth point, and I really think that fourth point is that I often see a gap, is that employee training staff is trained, that training that they receive is is that it's a very small window at the beginning of the school year, and it generally is just about the topic of run, hide, fight, or whatever philosophy is that they use that term run, hide, fight in a very generic form. So it's really about realizing, we as law enforcement officers realize that it's not one and done in regards to training. So engaging with the employees throughout the school year in some way, shape, or form. Limited professional development time, but there's things that we can do to engage with them to reinforce that training. And that really takes us to that coordinated response, is that those four subjects in regards to the school building, is that those processes are in place. Now is that when that emergency happens, is that what's happening outside the building, is there an orchestrated process for law enforcement, fire, and EMS to appropriately respond to this building? Not to get too far into the weeds, but data doesn't support, looking at the data over the course of the last 30 years in America, looking at school shootings, data doesn't support all law enforcement, all fire, and all EMS rushing to the building and parking in front of the building. It enhances that chaos as opposed to minimizing it. And so we need to think about, how do we organize it a little bit more? How do we minimize that chaos? We can't eliminate it, and I think that we all understand that. And to really put into perspective what it is that we're talking, how chaotic it could be or will be, quite honestly, is, look, the average school building in America has 500 students. Okay, that may be much larger than what you have within our rural communities. But even if it's half of that, we're talking about a small village that is within our community, that's housing our children all day, every day. That school really is a small village. And so managing all of these people during a critical incident. And when we look at that reunification model, is that, you know, there's a lot of pre-planning that has to go into reunification. A lot of people are showing up. On average, 4 people for every student that we have. So if we have 250 students, is that there's 1,000 people coming to our reunification site. A lot of people to manage, a lot of people to control. And so is that when we start looking at these processes, what's happening at the building and at the reunification site, law enforcement, emergency services as a whole is an integral part to that. And, that this last one is that, most law enforcement agencies in Ohio, and quite honestly across America, don't have 65 cops. Top to bottom, we don't have 65 cops. So that just reinforces this mutual aid, secondary law enforcement conversations that we need to have. Is that whether it's as a county or as a region, is that realizing I need, as that investigation progresses at the school building. All right. After the violence has stopped, there's an investigation and a lot of processes that have to happen there. I need bodies there. And at the reunification site, I'm going to need 65 cops. And where are those 65 cops coming from? Is it and so when we start thinking about all of these things that we have to do, is that it starts to compound on us quickly. And it's things that we don't want to try and figure out the day of the emergency. This is my advice to a community that has not thought about coordinated response, does not have policy or process for being able to do this, is that I think that as a community, i.e., law enforcement, fire, EMS, and schools, sit down and we start having a conversation about everything that needs to happen, right? And we start listing that on a piece of paper. right? Is that even in today's world of technology and cloud-based, is start making a list of everything that needs to happen. And then we start realizing the resources that we need to have to be able to adequately respond to this. And as we build that list, is that then what that very next step is building that incident action plan. And that's really what we're going to talk about. Is it realizing that not only are we going to have multiple agencies coming to the facility, is that advocating that rapid evacuation. If staff and students can't lock down, they're going to be running away, and so that just elevates that um, that chaos. And honestly, is that our patrol officers need to understand the dynamic of rapid evacuation. They roll up and there are students and staff running across the front yard of the school, and they weren't mentally prepared for that dynamic. It can create that sensory overload. And they're already probably operating at that sensory overload. So it just be, because of the dynamic of the event, parents are coming to the school building. I think we all realize that, and that has elevated since the event in Uvalde. Is that we look at actual school shootings that have happened and all the swatting incidents that have happened. Is that parents are coming in droves to the school, and so understanding that we've got to manage that. And there's a couple of different considerations for that. Is that number one, thinking about communicating with parents, educating them on where you want them to go. Don't come to the school. All right, you're going to get in the way. Is that eh, in telling them where you want to go. That communication piece from the school district when this critical incident happens is an important part. Using that mass notification, email chain, social media, all of those things, is that having that plan in place so that we can start communicating with these parents and providing guidance to them. And if I think if we look at it from a parent's perspective, as a parent, what would I want to know? What kind of information would I want to know? And if we start building that communication plan based on that viewpoint, is that I think we're going to be more successful. Is that you know any of us that are close to the media market, is that it's not going to take them long to show up. Quite honestly, it doesn't matter where you are, it's going to take them long to show up. And understanding that that's a monster that we have to feed. All right, is that we're thinking we're dealing with this critical incident, I don't have time for the media. Well, unfortunately, history has dictated to us that that becomes a bigger problem if we don't. Providing them with relevant, accurate information I think, is an important piece to keep in mind. Um, it, and when we think about that chaos of all emergency services rushing to the building, and rightfully so, is that we end up with police cars, fire trucks, and ambulances parked bumper to bumper. A few months ago, I was up in the state of Maine and conducting some training, and they were telling me about a swatting incident that they had last fall. And there were so many police cars, fire trucks, and ambulances parked on the street in front of the school that they were unable to move the buses from the school to the reunification site. There was no room on the road. And you think about, if I've got wounded in there that I need to get out quickly, that ambulance may not be able to maneuver to get that child to that hospital or that trauma center or the landing zone. And so just thinking about that perspective. And I think that if we pre-plan and create this incident action plan where we're identifying primary initial responsibilities, we're going to minimize some of this significantly. And I think as we progress through this conversation, you're going to see what I'm talking about. And understanding that cars, moving cars throughout the community. This critical incident happens at the school. The world doesn't stop turning. We still have a lot of different things going on, a lot of movement going on. And so, understanding that traffic congestion, and how do we minimize that from interrupting what we're trying to do at the school. So there's and I once again, is that building an incident action plan, is pre-planning this, and creating a philosophy as a community is going to minimize all of these things. So what is it that we're doing beyond the school? Is that there is a need for this collaborative effort, and as police chiefs, is that realizing that we don't have the resources to be able to do what it is that needs to be done. And so we started having conversations with the county sheriff. We started having conversations with other law enforcement agencies, and then realizing the need for fire and EMS to be on the same page as we are in regards to what it is that we're doing. And that's really what it's about, is truly having conversations. And I kind of hit on this as I was talking just a little bit ago, is that philosophy that I have it's what I call the 5+1. The first 5 minutes of an active shooter event is that our goal is law enforcement, find the threat, neutralize the threat. That's it. All right. There is nothing else within our priorities except for that. And that's that initial law enforcement arrival at the school. If we have SROs, chances are data supports that SRO is going to eliminate that threat. But if not, when the cavalry shows up, those first initial officers are dealing with that threat. Get that. I understand that. But from a command perspective, is that we have to start thinking about the +1. Is that, all right, we find the threat, neutralize the threat. 1 minute after the bullets stop flying, infinite until we have done everything that we need to do. There is a laundry list of things that have to be done, and it's about identifying those action items and creating a plan for it. All right, pen to paper. What is it that we're doing? Is that what? How are we going to do what it is that we need to do? And that incident action plan does that. It really will accomplish what it is that we're trying to do here. Um, there is a best practices in regards to coordinated response in this country, is that realizing that there were a lot of mistakes made in previous events in this country. There was a lot that we have learned, not necessarily mistakes, but we have evolved from. Columbine is probably the hallmark one. And I'm aging myself from a law enforcement perspective because I was still on the job when this happened. Um, and that was a dynamic shift in how we thought an active shooter event would happen. And so realizing that this evolution has started to progress to this rescue task force concept, having this coordinated response plan, knowing what all other emergency services are going to do. Active shooter event is not a law enforcement function where everybody else stages 3 blocks down the street and waits till it's safe. That doesn't work. And realizing that multiple organizations across America have encouraged a coordinated response. The NFPA 3000, the standard that came out in April of 2018, in regards to active shooter response, it is a phenomenal roadmap for you in regards to what law enforcement needs to consider, what fire and EMS need to consider, and realizing that those things are an integral part. Is that if you have not gotten a hold of this standard, I highly recommend that you do. Is that it's very enlightening in regards to all of those things that we need to consider from a management standpoint. It will help with the policy creation as well. Incident action planning, this is a term, this is a process that is uh, has been around for a long time in the emergency management world, in the fire world. Incident action planning was born with the wildfires out west, and it really is not something that has been embraced in the law enforcement community historically. I think that it has grown with law enforcement's awareness of the value that an incident action plan brings over the past probably 8 to 10 years. But what we're looking at is that when we look at this collaborative response, is that what are we talking about? What is it that we need to be able to do? And when you look at all of it, we're going to talk about each one of these individually, but there really becomes a laundry list of things to consider. Command and control is critical. That 5+1 theory that I was talking about, that 1 minute after, is that command and control has to be in place for us to be able to do everything else that we have to do. And so thinking about locations of command posts, who has the responsibility of getting that command post up and running, and realizing that anyone that comes to our critical incident, if you're arriving at the school, at the facility for a critical incident, i.e., an active shooter event, your agency is coming, make sure you send a representative to the command post. Is that, we don't want people self-dispatching, is that because it's really just does enhance the chaos. Is that if you're coming, bring a boss with you, is kind of how I like to look at it. And redundancy is that I look at a school, and with my community partners, we identify that particular intersection is perfect for a command post. And so, we identify that as where the unified command post is going to be. Real world never works out the way that it's supposed to in the real world. So you build redundancy in, right? This is the primary. This is the place that we're going to be. If it doesn't work, we're going to go someplace else, and articulate where that secondary command post is going to be. Is that it's remember, it's about minimizing the chaos, is that and making sure that we have the ability to do what it is that we need to do. I will say this quickly, is that when we think about an active shooter event at a school, small agencies don't have a lot of resources, and we look at subject matter experts in our community in regards to incident command. Most communities, that's a fire department. I think all of us recognize that the fire department does incident command far more often than we do in the law enforcement world. And if they're even okay with it, good with it, is that looking at them, looking at the local fire chief, volunteer or not, and saying, Chief, is that there's a critical incident at this school. We'd like you to establish the command post. And as the cavalry's coming, law enforcement, fire, EMS, secondary law enforcement, mutual aid, is that we start getting brain power in one location. Is that fire department, fire chief doesn't have anything to do in the first 5 minutes of an active shooter event. So we're giving them something to do, something that they're typically good at. And so, realizing that we get command and control up and running, we're rocking and rolling on those things that we have to do next. Rapid evacuation. Schools, for the most part, almost all schools that I come in contact with advocate for rapid evacuation if they can't lock down. And that's, I think it's absolutely critical to have that philosophy. And then giving staffing and students someplace to run to, a rally point. This term was originated through the ALICE program, and it is really spread to almost every protocol advocates for giving students someplace to run to. Is that the reason that we give them someplace to run to? Staff and students leaving a school building and going out into the community, we have a responsibility to ensure that they're safe. Number two is to care for the walking wounded. If we have a student or a staff member or a student that leaves the school building and is injured in some way, shape, or form and needs medical care, we need to be able to provide that to them. So giving them someplace to run to. and then being able to provide those services to them at the rally point. A law enforcement agency, secondary law enforcement agency assigned to go into the rally point, fire truck or an ambulance assigned of going to the rally point. Then we're able to provide those services, and I don't have to, from the command post, think, oh, I got to send somebody to the rally point. They're already going to the rally point. They're not coming to the school. And I will share with you the Findlay, Ohio model is that when we first created our coordinated response plans, is that we saw this as a gap, being able to have the resources. So we assigned the Ohio State Highway Patrol. All right. They have a district barracks within our community, within Findlay, Ohio. And so there's always plenty of troopers there. And we assign them the responsibility. That's their job. If there's a critical incident at any of the schools, their job is to go to the rally point. Don't come to the school. And so, realizing that is an important piece of in regards to our response, because once these students, staff and students get to the rally point, got to move them to the reunification point. So is that, there's a lot of moving parts here that we need to consider. Looking at, that the different pieces of that rally point, the security and then the transportation. Staging areas. Avoiding having police cars, fire trucks, and ambulances in front of your school is that I talked about that before, is that that's just enhancing that chaos. If a law enforcement agency is responding and we don't have a primary initial responsibility for them, that they are educated on going to the law enforcement staging area. And we will assign a task to you shortly after your arrival there. EMS staging is that realizing that we need to be able to park multiple ambulances and be able to get to those ambulances and deploy those ambulances effectively to the school. So coming up with an EMS staging area. I've had a couple EMS chiefs say to me is that, they like having that EMS staging area close to the command post so they can look out and see how many ambulances do I actually have. And that really just that was a a preference to for them. I think that you have to really look at where your command post is from the ground perspective. All right, knowing your community, knowing that area, that command post is at that specific intersection. Is it appropriate to stage ambulances in close proximity? So there has to be that taken into consideration. Um, Realizing that we've got to establish an outer perimeter around this, and having that law enforcement response is going to be heavy. All right, I did even in rural America. Uh, Historically, we're seeing a lot of law enforcement coming to these events, and rightfully so. So, realizing that I probably want that law enforcement staging area outside of my outer perimeter. Is it parking lots where, Walmart parking lots, grocery store parking lots, mall parking lots, anything where we can put a lot of vehicles, is that those are ideal. And these staging areas is that we need to realize that we need to have that staging officer, somebody assigned to that position that is communicating with the command post. Thinking about your outer perimeter is that where is it that I want to establish this outer perimeter? In this shade, the reason that I use the shaded area is thinking that, all right, the school's in within that shaded area. From a community perspective, what else is in that shaded area that's going to be impacted by that shutdown? Because we're going to shut down the outer perimeter. And so it could be for 24, 48 hours, depending on the level of investigation and what's going on at the school building. What impact does that have to the community. What else is within that perimeter that might be affected? And then looking about how do we establish this outer perimeter? Law enforcement are the subject matter experts on traffic control. So we can look at this map in very short order and realize where I need to put barricades to be able to create that outer perimeter. We can then articulate how many barricades do I need? What direction of traffic am I trying to stop? And where that intersection is, I provide those three components of information to Public Works, County Garage, whoever has barricade responsibilities in your community. We give them that information, and they can drive around with a pickup truck and a trailer dropping barricades, and it's one less thing that we have to do at the command post. And we're able to know that that is being done, and we're creating that outer perimeter in very short order, quite honestly. Um, and then thinking about your inner perimeter is the inner perimeter is, as I gather enough law enforcement officers and start positioning them on campus around the school building, is and the reason that we want to do that is, number one, is to keep parents out. All right, parents that have gotten within the inner perimeter or the outer perimeter, we want to be able to keep them off campus. No, function number two is that to provide assistance to those officers inside the building. If we run a scenario where the officers there responding to that threat inside the building end up pushing that threat out the back of the building, and that threat takes off into the community, we have resources around the building to appropriately respond to that dynamic. And I think if you process what has happened historically in this country, is that that's not a stretch that we would see, that we may see something like that. So just thinking about that dynamic. This is an example of how we might articulate that outer perimeter, where those traffic posts are, how many barricades we need. One additional thing is do we need officers at that intersection, or can we accomplish it with just barricades? Really depends upon the intersection. Some intersections may need 4 8-foot barricades and a cop, or just 8 4 8-foot barricades may accomplish what it is we're trying to accomplish. So it's identifying what resources do I need, and how am I going to deploy those resources. Landing zones. Right. First of all, is that most fire departments in our in this country, quite honestly, have predetermined landing zones in their communities. And if that is the case, all right, we've already identified the lat and long of that landing zone and shared it with our air ambulance service, whatever that happens to be, is that we have these predetermined locations that we can plug into our school IAP. And then subsequently it becomes part of that plan. We don't need to create new landing zones. If we already have predetermined landing zones in proximity to our schools, will work in regards to a critical incident at the school, then we plug that into the plan. If you don't have predetermined landing zones, there's staying away from football fields that have synthetic turf, especially those that have the rubber pellets embedded down in the turf. That doesn't mix well with rotary wing aircraft. And looking at parking lots, all right? We look at on Google Maps and the parking lot's empty. That looks like a good landing zone, all right? In the real world, Monday through Friday, is that parking lot empty? Would we actually be able to use that for a landing zone, or does it have 52 cars parked in the parking lot? And then figuring out who has that responsibility of establishing that landing zone. From a rural community perspective, is that if we have a volunteer fire department, they may not have the resources to be able to do what it is they need to do at the school and the landing zone. So that mutual aid, all right, is that we look at it and the fire chief says, I can't do both things. Don't have enough people for that. Then we think about what mutual aid agency are we going to assign the responsibility of landing zones? Fire chief from community next door. Chief, if there's a critical incident at our schools, we would like you to respond and establish landing zones at these specific locations, and obviously providing that information. So as they're responded, that chief knows what it is that you want him to do. Traffic flow. Thinking about, did I turn my camera off? I sure did. Sorry about that. Traffic flow. Thinking about how do we want ambulances to go from their staging area to the schools? And the reason that we may need that is that those ambulance drivers may not be uh, knowledgeable on where the school actually is. And so being able to draw a map for them and being able to push that map to them or provide them with that information is beneficial. Is the, once again, we're trying to stay as organized as we possibly can. Media staging. I talked about, how important it is that we recognize the media is going to be an important component of our ability to manage this incident, and creating a media staging area, um, sharing that with the media beforehand. Fairborn Schools down by Dayton, Ohio, they have been utilizing media staging areas for a very long time. And whenever there is a news event at Fairborn Schools, the media typically asks, are we doing this at the staging area, or where are we meeting to do this? All right. They've created a culture with that media market in regards to what happens at Fairborn. This is where you go. All right. That takes a long time to accomplish. So if I'm doing it just for critical incidents, is that I identify that media staging area. I share with the media, hey, if there's a critical incident at our schools, we don't expect one, but if it does happen, this is where we want you to go. All right. And then the schools having that communication piece. All right. And I talked about communicating with the parents and the community through social media and other technology. Is the same thing with the media pushing out. There's a critical incident at the high school. Um, Respond to the media staging area, and someone will meet you there and provide information. And someone from either the school or the community as a whole, all right, somebody that's trained as a public information officer or some level of training in dealing with the media is assigned to that staging area. Um, Depending on the size of your emergency management within your county, is that typically they have someone that is trained in media engagement, working with the media, and so just figuring out where that's going to come from. But I truly think it is something that we have to be aware of. The rescue task force concept, using that EMS fire component to be able to dump them into the building and provide medical care to those that are wounded before we clear the building and make it a cold zone. Right? Is that thinking hazmat? Is that hazmat? They have hot, warm, and cold. Same concept with the rescue task force concept. Hot zone for an active shooter event. That's where bullets are flying. All right, we don't need medics there. All right, we want them in the warm zone. All right, hasn't been cleared, but there's no violence occurring. Cold is where we know there is no one. All right, our ultimate goal is to turn that entire building into a cold zone. That takes time. We don't have time to turn that into a cold zone and then bring medics in to treat the wounded. We all understand the golden hour. We all understand the dynamics of gunshot wounds, and getting them to a trauma center as quickly as we possibly can increases that survivability. And that's the idea of the rescue task force concept, getting those wounded out of the building and to the appropriate medical care as quickly as we possibly can. The NFPA 3000 addresses that. There are multiple agencies across America that have embraced this and have developed comprehensive policies and procedures for this. Don't reinvent the wheel. If you don't already have a policy in regards to this, don't reinvent the wheel. Go find agencies that have, and it becomes part of that incident action plan. Um, that EMS triage area are for those students that need medical care as we're evacuating them after the critical incident. All right, we've turned it into a cold zone, treated the wounded, we've done everything we need to do. Now we start moving students because we could end up with students that have glass embedded in their skin, cement, wood embedded in their skin. And so being able to treat those injuries before they go to the reunification site. Casualty collection points. These are typically parts of the building where I can appropriately I can drive an ambulance up to that door and load somebody wounded on that. And the reason that we want to establish multiple casualty collection points is that it's a very fluid situation. Is that we go into this building? Well, honestly, when planning this, we don't know where the wounded are going to be. So we establish casualty collection points all around the building, and then we are able to utilize this numbering system to effectively get ambulances to where we need them. And I'm a big advocate of just going around the building clockwise. Starting at the front door is casualty collection point one, and we go around the building to all those doors where I can pull an ambulance up to the door, and we mark them appropriately, that numbering system clockwise, and and this is going to expedite getting those wounded into where they need to be in the medical care that they need to be receiving. I don't have enough time today to talk about reunification to the depths of what the conversation needs to happen. I will tell you this is that we at StrataSite did a reunification webinar um, in February, and I think that you'll find it very beneficial in regards to all of the considerations that need to go into reunification from both internal school perspective and the community's perspective. You can find it on our YouTube channel. You can go to our website, and there's a link there as well. But is that communication is crucial in regards to reunification prior to, all right, engaging with the schools and having an understanding of where that reunification site is going to be, what law enforcement needs are there for the reunification site, and a lot of the other community stakeholders that need to be involved in the reunification process, and just making sure that we're all on the same sheet of music and that we've identified those locations. Um, don't use football fields. Don't use other schools, if at all possible. Definitely don't use football fields. Uh, the preference is not to use other schools within your school district or any other school, quite honestly, because you have to uh, do a controlled evacuation of the students in the school where you're doing reunification before you can do reunification. It just elevates that chaos, quite honestly. Yet to see one that is successful in that process. So is it, there's a lot of considerations, and like I said, is that we get into that in that other webinar. 911, making sure that our 911 center is trained on what the schools are going to do. We talked about that earlier. 911 is trained on what the law enforcement response is going to be from, the law enforcement response to the building, what kind of information do we want them to pull from the callers? All right, is that most 911 centers have established standards, all right, whether it's APCO or something else in regards to the questions that we want them to ask. My only statement to that is that we as law enforcement command need to evaluate those questions and make sure that those questions that are being asked are appropriate for our community. Is there anything else that we would want to know for our community? All right, best practices doesn't mean we can't elevate what APCO or any other organization is recommending. So making sure that we understand that, and 911 being familiar with the entire incident action plan, making sure that if we're placing responsibilities upon them to make phone calls and notifications, is that they understand what it is that we want them to do and how we want them to do it. Um, Evacuating the building. There is a active shooter event in your local school. Vast majority of the school population is going to lock down, shut their door, lock the door, barricade the door of their classrooms. Some are going to rapidly evacuate. We talked about that during rally points. All right. Those that have locked down in their classrooms, is that we have got to create a process for that controlled evacuation of them. Building principal, the SRO, or some other law enforcement officer going to each classroom door, putting a key in the door and trying to open up that door isn't going to work. We have created a barrier between the hallway and the classroom that has to be overcome. And I think that the best way to do that is through communication, is that we have stopped the threat. We have done everything that we need to do inside the building, and we're ready to do that evacuation. Somebody gets on the PA system and makes the announcement. This is Lieutenant Lowry of the Findlay Police Department. The building is safe. We're going to start evacuation. We're going to start with room 101. Room 101, our officers are coming to your door and knock on your door. I need you to open up the door to them. And some of you that are familiar with what schools are being trained is that we train staff to ignore what if somebody gets on the PA during this event, that the cops are going to come get them. Well, if I barricade the door, you're not going to open up the door. If I dropped a pin in that door, I have a secondary locking device. It's going to be cumbersome for you to get into that room. So let's make it as easy as we possibly can. That PA announcement notifies the entire building that the threat is over. Room 101 knows the cops are coming. So that staff member is trained that when that cop knocks on that door, that there is a process that they follow. They go to the door, maintaining cover, and they confirm that the cop is out there. Then they can unbarricade the door, open the door, and we've eliminated that gap, that hurdle that we have, that barrier. And so then that cop can direct that classroom to walk to another cop down at the end of the hallway. All right. This process that I'm going to explain to you works in the real world. I can dump 1,900 kids out of a high school building in about 45 minutes utilizing the system with very few cops. It's leapfrogging. All right. Those cops, it's more than one cop at that classroom at room 101, directs that staff member to stand in the threshold of the door and for all the students to line up directly behind that staff member. They take their hands and they cross them across their chest and rest them on their opposite elbows, and they leave them there. And they walk in a single file line down to the cop at the end of the hallway. And then the officers that initiated that at room 101, go to the next room that's directed by command. All right. And room by room, I move down the hallway, moving students out of their classroom. Those students that come out of the classroom, they go down to another cop. That cop tells them to go to another cop and another cop, and out of the building they go. From their classroom, out of the building, onto a school bus so they can be transported to the reunification site. Right. So we need to have school buses. Need to know how many school buses that you're going to need to be able to transport transport all of the students from the school to the reunification site, realizing that you probably don't have enough buses for the entire student population because a bus has a prescribed number of students that they can put in that bus. Right. All I will say is that there are laws within our states that allow law enforcement to do certain things outside uh, statutes when there's an emergency. All right. That exists. So we have the ability to transport a lot of students with limited resources, and realizing that we have to have that process in place. So thinking about how do we do that? Not breaking down doors, not trying to overcome those barricading devices that have been put in place. Um, Looking at that community-wide plan is that I want to identify all of my stakeholders, and I think we've articulated who those stakeholders are, and realizing that we're educating everybody on what it is that we want them to do. I, as the police chief, know that all those other law enforcement agencies in my area, whether it's in my county or in my area, are coming. And I've had conversations with those police chiefs of those agencies and have ensured that they're going to send resources. And if they do, this is what I want them to do. And all of a sudden, we start moving a little bit more organized, a little bit cleaner, a little bit less chaotic. Can't eliminate it, but a little less chaotic. Is that incident action plans are not designed for street cops that are responding to the school. All right. Incident action plans are a management tool, command and control tool. And so every agency that's responding, that command knows what their responsibilities are. So if I'm the neighboring community and I've got 3 cops coming to help you, and I know you, because of conversations that we've had, I know that you don't want my 3 cops at the school. You want my 3 cops doing whatever. And so I direct my cops that are coming 100 mile an hour, all right? Because we all know how street cops are. They're coming 100 mile an hour. Is that I, as their supervisor, their boss, I'm telling them where to go and what to do. That's how it works. And when we do that, it is highly effective. And when we create this plan, the bottom line is we have to train to this plan. I can write an incident action plan for any community in America. All right. And it would check the boxes for best practices. But at the end of the day, it's not worth the paper it's written on or the platform that it's used within if there's no guidance, no training to what it is that we're trying to do. Real quick, 30-second commercial on StrataSite, what we do, how we do it, why we do it. All right. Why do we do it? Number one is because having an incident action plan, having a process where we're all working in harmony with one another is going to save lives. At the end of the day, that has to be our goal. All right. Our goal of active shooter response cannot be our job is to eliminate the threat. No, sir, it's not. Your job is to save as many lives as you possibly can. And by having a platform that I could create a comprehensive incident action plan built on best practices that I can share with all of those stakeholders, all right, those police chiefs from around the region, I can give them access to my plan. They can see the plan. Not only am I telling them what I want them to do, they're looking at it. And so that knowledge base elevates a little bit because they start understanding what it is that you want them to do. And being able to deploy it in the 911 center. All right. We partner with Rapid SOS. Any 911 center that uses Rapid SOS, that this incident action plan is on the screen in front of them. That 911 center is the hub for communication initially, especially initially during a critical incident. And so all of that information in front of the dispatcher is an important piece. And I talked about dispatch knowing what our incident action plan is. Now I can put a map with worksheets and knowledge of what those map pins represent in front of those people, and they can effectively guide those resources as they're responding. Is that that rapid SOS integration is that links system is that we have the ability to push this plan out to every cell phone, to all technology, all right, the entire plan through your mass notification system or your emergency notification system, either one. All right. I can send this to every cop in the county. They get a link on their phone and boom, they hit that link and the entire plan is on their phone. All right. And yeah, it does expire after a certain amount of time. Thinking about operational security, don't want to plan out there forever and on people's devices, and that link subsequently expires. Is that all of the teachers in the school building can get a text message on their phone that shows them where the rally points are and gives them a map on how to get from the school to the rally point. And so it's very diverse. Look, my philosophy is that I'm going to build a plan that works in the real world, that I have the ability to put into the hands of the people that need to know it when they need to know it. And we have accomplished that. And that training piece is there with the learning management system. I can create quizzes about our plan. All right. Is that we build this plan, I can create 2 or 3 questions about my plan and ship it off to all my cops, all my firefighters. They have to go in, look at the plan, answer 2 or 3 questions, and move on. All right. Brings it to the front of their brain. Our learning management system, using it with teachers. All right. We go into the school, talk to them at the beginning of this year about run, hide, fight. 3 to 4 weeks later, we send them a quiz. All right. What did we talk about? They answer those questions, thinking about how human beings learn. All right. The more they engage, the more likely they are to remember. And so that constant engagement through the learning management system is an important piece to that. And so, I think that realizing that the school has those emergency operation plans, that internal process, is that having a place to store them so that we as stakeholders have the ability to access them. Thinking about the master schedule, the bell schedule of your school buildings, get a hold of it. If you don't already have that access to those documents, get those. Those are critical for that controlled evacuation. What classrooms are occupied at any given time of the day, um, and being able to access them. Is that document storage within StrataSite have the ability to do that.